Economist Richard Wolff says we have to be radical now or risk losing everything. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His latest is The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. Democracyatwork.info, rdwolf with 2fs.com are his websites. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. And Professor Wolff, welcome back. I'm curious your thoughts as we go into this coming legislative session, both the lame duck period and the post, and when after Joe Biden gets sworn in, whether or not Democrats have control of the Senate. What are the realistic steps that can or should be taken by Congress, by the administration, by executive action, by governors around the country to put our economy back together and make things more sustainable and reduce the impact of these cyclic crashes and the idiocy of deregulation of banks, like led us to the 2008 crash, or ignoring pandemics, which led us to where we are right now?
Well, I think the kind of trick question, because of the word realistic that you put in there. Let me explain. Usually the word realistic is interpreted as though we are bound by the limits of what conventional Republicans and Democrats have been doing, and that any attempt to venture outside that framework is somehow doomed in the beginning and therefore, quote unquote, unrealistic. I think I have to break that taboo in answering your question. And my rationale for doing it, is that the problems we're facing now are of a different order of magnitude. It would have been difficult to deal with the economic crash if that's all we had, a typical every 4 to 7 year downturn that capitalism has, even a more severe one, which this certainly is. But to have this, the worst in a century, occurring at the same time and in the same country as the COVID virus is completely out of control through the failure of both the private and public sectors to prepare or contain it, that's too much. That's a level of difficulty that requires unusual steps that in the past have been thought of as quote-unquote unrealistic. Let me pick the single one that I would most favor to answer your question. And I choose it in part because we did it once before here in the United States, so it isn't unprecedented. And that is a federal program of mass employment. We did that in the 1930s. Roughly 15 million people hired between 1934 and 1941, before our entrance into World War II. And it saved people's lives, it saved their homes, it saved their self-esteem, and it was a major contributor to getting the United States through a horrific crash without turning to the kinds of fascistic solutions that people who suffered the same crash turned to in Germany, in Italy, in Spain, and so on. So that's what I would urge. We should do that. When people say, well, what would you have everybody do? I kind of smile because I want to say, are you kidding? Let me give you just a few examples. We don't have testing in this country, even now, of the sort we need to know how to combat this virus. One of the reasons we're not doing well is because we lost 9 months when we could have and should have set up mechanisms to test everybody. Hire millions of people, give them the short training they need to administer tests in an ongoing way to keep track of this disease. It's a useful thing to do. Here's a second one. We are losing a generation of people's education. Millions and millions of our young people, from kindergarten on up through college, are not basically getting much of an education. Why? Because we didn't solve the problem. We could have. We could have commandeered the empty theaters, the empty restaurants, the empty stores, created makeshift classrooms, had one teacher for every 3 or 4 students, suitably social distanced one from the other, so that real teaching could continue. That would have, of course, required hiring millions of additional teachers, but we have 25 million people possessed of all levels of skill and training and education. We could have found from among them the kind of people that would not only have given them the job they asked for, but given us a continuation of education rather than this very serious disruption, which is going to cost our economy for decades to come. And then there's the Green New Deal, and then there's a proper daycare program to free up young parents, and then there's a program for the elderly so we are decent to people in their retirement. I mean, I'm already taking care of all of the unemployed, and I haven't gotten to a long additional list that a good collection of Americans could come up with in 5 or 10 minutes. That's what we should do. That would put the kind of money into people's pockets, and it would change the atmosphere of defeat, of chaos, of a sense of momentous decline. It would have every kind of conflict easier for us to solve. We wouldn't be looking at the tsunami of evictions scheduled for the end of this month because people put back to work would have the money to pay their rent and make their mortgage payments and so on.
So I completely agree with you on all points. And there were 100 million people roughly in the United States when Franklin Roosevelt did that deal. 15 million, that's 15% of the workforce.
That's right.
In 1925, during the Roaring '20s, it would have been unimaginable to say that we were going to start a program for old age insurance called Social Security. We were going to put 15 million people to work through a series of 3-letter programs. We were going to have long-term unemployment or even any kind of unemployment insurance. We were going to establish a minimum wage. All of those things were unrealistic to the extreme. In 1925. And then 1929 happened, 1930 happened. It cracked open that window and provided FDR with the opportunity. Now we've got a similar crack, in my opinion, and apparently in yours as well. And the question in my mind is whether the Biden administration and the Democrats in Congress are going to rise to it. And I realize that we all play a role in that we need to create as much political pressure on them as possible to do so. Just providing, we have about a minute left here, providing them with an economic argument. Do you have any suggestions, memes to promote that might inspire our Democratic politicians, maybe even catch a few Republicans?
Here's the harshest one I can think of, but it's the only honest one I can come up with. If you don't break out of the mold, if you don't, and I'm talking here about Janet Yellen and all the others that he's gathered as his so-called economic team, if you don't do the things you didn't think of, using exactly your model of 1929 versus 1925, what you're going to do is preside over a return to the pre-Trump normal that you talk about, and that will recreate the next Trump. It's not a choice between something comfortable and something radical. It's a choice between breaking the mold and doing something radical a la FDR or writing your own eclipse 4 years from now because you're going to have the same collection of forces, only now with a 4-year program to overthrow your government.